بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فإن أحسن الكلام كلام الله وخير الحدي حدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وإن شر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. So today is lesson number 27, 27th lesson in our series on Taqreeb Tadmuriyyah. And in the previous lesson we started discussing the 5 of the 7 or so additional qawaid, rules, which Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah mentioned at the end of his treatise, or the section on the attributes. And that rule or principle relates to our knowledge, the nature of our knowledge of what Allah has informed us about Himself. And so we established that there are 2 sides of this. One side which is known to us, which is ma'loom, and one side which is majhul. As for what is known, this is the ma'na, the meaning. As for what is unknown, this is the kayfiyah, how, or the reality of what we are being informed of. And the Shaykh said that, summarizing the essence of what Ibn Taymiyyah, what he said, that this can be proven by way of revelation and reason. So we looked at 2 arguments. As for the evidence from the revelation, then it was those verses in which Allah Azza wa Jal commands us or encourages us to reflect, to make tadabbur, and mentioning that the Quran is for the ulul albab, the people of intellect, the people of intelligence, and verses which are similar to this. And the general point was that it's impossible for us to reflect upon something if we do not know its meaning. And the whole of the Quran, we've been ordered to reflect upon the whole of the Quran. There's nothing in the Quran for which we have not been commanded to reflect. And so therefore this is a proof to show that the Quran and all that it contains of the mention of Allah, His names, His attributes, paradise, hellfire, the unseen, and so on and so forth, that there are meanings, and those meanings are to be reflected upon. And so this was the evidence of revelation. As for the evidence of reason, the Shaykh brought a number of evidences very quickly. The first evidence was that Allah Azza wa Jal is, like, His information, His reporting is the greatest reporting. So when Allah informs us, this is the greatest type of report that can ever be. The report from the Creator of the heavens and the earth, the khabar. It is unlike the khabar of anyone else, of an angel, of a messenger, of any other man. And so the argument was that it's impossible for Allah that when He informs us about Himself, that somehow this is unknown to us, and yet when He informs us about Fir'aun or Iblis or Haman, the greatest of the people of disbelief, that somehow this now is known. Right? So when He mentions to us the attributes and the traits and the reality of not the reality, but the traits and the qualities and the descriptions of Fir'aun and Haman and the greatest of the people of disbelief, that we know what that means, and yet when He reports about Himself or gives us khabar about Himself, that we don't know what this means. This is majhul to us. This cannot make sense. And the second argument was that it's impossible for Allah Azza wa Jal to reveal to us a book which He describes as Hakim, Kareem, Majid, Azim, Mubin, all these kind of words and descriptions about this book, and yet, we treat this book as if it is like a foreign language to us, as if we are looking at Chinese or Russian letters and we don't know what the letters mean. Or even if we know what the sounds are represented, we don't know what the word means, right? It's impossible for that to be the case when Allah has described His book in this manner. So those were the two arguments of reason. And the Shaykh then went on to discuss, he introduced us to that verse, because this is a verse around which there's a lot of discussion, which is used often by the people of innovation. The verse number 7 in Surah Ali Imran, where Allah mentions that in the Quran there are verses which are muhkam, which are clear and decisive in their meaning, and verses which are from the mutashabihat, those which are ambiguous in meaning. And this verse can be read in two ways, depending on where you stop the sentence. And so we discussed that, and we said, whichever way you read the verse, you can either refer to ta'wil, which means tafsir, which Allah and the people of knowledge know, or it can mean ta'wil with the meaning of the reality, in which case it is only Allah who knows that. So we can read that verse in one of two ways. And that's basically where we stopped in the previous lesson. And today we are going to continue. So today we are continuing with the same principle. There's a number of things still to discuss as part of principle number 5. One of them is ta'wil. We're going to look a bit more detail into ta'wil itself later in this lesson, inshallah ta'ala. And also we're going to discuss the same issue of, in the Quran, there is that which is muhkam and there's that which is mutashabih. We'll look at that in more detail as well, maybe in the lesson after. But for today's lesson, continuing from where we left off, Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen, rahimahullah, he says that through this corroboration, so what we established in the previous lesson, what we corroborated, what we established by way of these evidences, that the nature of our knowledge is that we know the meaning of what we have been informed of, and we are ignorant of the reality of what we have been informed of. Right? So we established that with evidences from revelation, and likewise evidences from reason. And so the Shaykh says, he goes on, he says that بهذا التقرير الذي تبين به أنه لا يمكن أن يكون في القرآن شيء لا يعلم معناه إلا الله يتبين بطلان مذهب المفوضة الذين يفوضون علم معاني آيات الصفات ويدعون أن هذا هو مذهب السلف. So he says, through this, what we've established, it becomes clear that it is not possible for there to be anything in the Quran whose meaning is not known except to Allah. Right? So there's nothing in the Quran whose meaning is known only to Allah. The ma'na here, right? Rather, the meaning of every single verse in the Quran, the knowledge of that is present in the ummah as a whole. Not that every individual or but the knowledge of all of that is present within the ummah. Okay, then he says, once we establish this point,
can you repeat that again?
Yeah. So the Shaykh is saying that it is impossible for there to be anything in the Quran whose meaning is known only to Allah. Meaning there's nothing hidden in the ma'ani of the Quran. Because if we start claiming there are hidden meanings in the Quran, we now start opening the door to, you have, like in Christianity, in Judaism, you have these, what we call the Gnostic movements, right? Esoteric movements, where basically they're claiming that there are hidden meanings in the Torah or in the Injil. There's hidden symbology. There's the letters represent numerology, and there's hidden things that go beyond what is apparent of the meaning. all of this is misguidance. And likewise to claim that there is in the Quran that whose meaning is completely unknown except to Allah Azza wa Jal, right? Then this would make the Quran, it would not be mubin anymore. Bilisanin Arabiyyin mubin, would not be mubin anymore, because the whole of the Quran is mubin, the whole of the Quran is hakim, and the whole of the Quran is for tadabbur, and so on and so forth. So once we establish this point, that there is nothing in the Quran whose meaning is known only to Allah, rather every single verse of the Quran, then its ma'na, its meaning, is known to at least some among the ummah. Now, once we establish that point, this first point, once we establish this point, through this point, the Shaykh says, يتبين بطلان مذهب المفوضة. Through this point, the way or the method of a group called the Mufawwida, its futility becomes apparent, its falsehood becomes apparent, right? Who are the Mufawwida? They are the ones who say, whose attitude and whose approach to the texts of the attributes, they say, Allah knows best what it means, right? They say, we don't know what this means. Allah becomes angry, Allah becomes pleased, Allah ascends above His throne, Allah has a face, right? They say, the meaning of this verse is unknown, we don't know what it means, and we submit the knowledge of that to Allah. Allah knows best what it means, right? So now they are basically claiming, like in essence, what they are really saying here is, say for example, the word wajh in Arabic, right? So waw, jim, ha, right? These represent the letter wajh, right? So what they are really saying is that when we read the Quran, we read, in the verses of the Quran which mention the wajh of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and what they are really saying here is, if you imagine that we had Russian or Chinese letters on the board here, for example, right? And we're looking at Russian, and nobody here, I'm guessing, nobody knows Russian or Chinese here, right? Okay, nobody knows Russian or Chinese. So if you were to look at those symbols, what they are saying is, even if we knew the sounds of those symbols, let's say somebody told us this symbol means this letter, this symbol, and we could read whatever. Because we don't know the language, we don't know the actual meaning, even though we know the sound that is made, right? So what they are saying to us, these people, is they are saying that when we read the verses of the attributes, then it's as if we are reading, for example, Russian or Chinese, the alphabet, right? And even if we were to know the sounds, in Chinese it works like a different way. It works in like symbols. But let's say Russian or some other language. Even if we knew the actual sounds of the individual letters and we could, pronounce the word, because we don't know the language, we still don't know the meaning of what we are actually saying, right? So they are saying that the word wajh in the Quran is exactly the same, right? Or for example, rahmah is exactly the same, right? We know the words and the letters, we know the sound which is made, but we don't know the meaning. And to all of the rest of the attributes which have come in the Quran and the Sunnah. So it becomes clear that once we know the correct interpretation of that verse that we discussed previous lesson, وَمَا يَعْلَمُ تَأْوِيلَهُ إِلَّا اللَّهُ وَالرَّاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ, we know that it is impossible for that to be in the Quran, and most specifically that which relates to its attributes, because that is the noblest and the greatest of all of knowledge. So we have the greatest of reporting, which is from Allah, about the greatest type of knowledge, which is knowledge about Allah, His names and His attributes. It's impossible for us to treat that as if we would treat some random Russian letters of the alphabet strung together whose meaning we don't even know. It's impossible for that to be the case. And so therefore, what is claimed by these people who take this approach of tafweed, which is one of two approaches, it's either ta'wil or tafweed, then we know that this is futile, it's false, just by this point alone. And he says, the mufawwida alladhina yufawwiduna ilma ma'ani ayat as-sifat wa yadda'una anna hadha huwa madhhab as-salaf. Right? These people claim this was the way of the salaf, right? So they ascribe this way to the companions and to the tabi'in and to the tabi'in, to the students of the companions and their students. And the Shaykh says, وَكَذَبُوا فِيمَا نَسَبُوهُ إِلَى السَّلَفِ. They have lied with respect to what they have attributed to the salaf. فَإِنَّ السَّلَفِ إِنَّمَا يُفَوِّضُونَ عِلْمَ الْكَيْفِيَّةِ دُونَ عِلْمَ الْمَعَانِي. Because indeed the salaf, they leave the knowledge of the kayfiyah, the reality, to Allah, not the knowledge of the meaning. Right? The meaning is very clear and very apparent. It is known in the Arabic language. When we read these Arabic words, wajh and yad and rahmah and sama' and basar and ilm and hikmah, all these words, knowledge, mercy, hearing, seeing, right? We know the meanings. And but it is the reality of these attributes as they are with Allah. This is what we are leaving that knowledge. We are resigning that knowledge to Allah Azza wa Jal. And as the Shaykh goes on to say, وَقَدْ تَوَاتَرَتْ النُّقُولُ عَنْهُمْ بِإِثْبَاتِ مَعَانِي هَذِهِ النُّصُوصِ إِجْمَالًا أَحْيَانًا وَتَفْصِيلًا أَحْيَانًا. Right? We know that what has come from the Salaf, what has been reported from the companions and their students, there are hundreds of narrations which make it clear from them that they affirm the meanings of these texts, of the attributes, right? Either in a general sense or in a very specific sense, right? Meaning their statements in a general sense or the specifics. For example, one of the famously reported statements from the Salaf is that they said about the verses of the attributes specifically, أَمِرُّوهَا كَمَا جَاءَتْ. أَمِرُّوهَا كَمَا جَاءَتْ, which means pass them on as they have come. So as these texts have come, the Quran or the ahadith, which mention the attributes of Allah, convey them and pass them on exactly as they have come. And these texts have come with meanings. So convey them with their meanings. Don't start giving allegorical interpretations and adding interpretations or adding or distorting the meaning of the word. No. Pass them on exactly as they have come. This is an example from the Salaf, from the righteous predecessors, of a generalized statement which shows to us the methodology of affirming the attributes in these texts. And a specific example of where there's a specific example of one of the Salaf affirming a specific attribute is the example of Imam Malik rahimahullah that we discussed many lessons ago, to do with al-istiwa, where Imam Malik rahimahullah, he said, al-istiwa ma'lum, wal-kayf majhul. Right? Al-istiwa, it is known, meaning we know what it means in the Arabic language. And the kayf, how it is, that is majhul, that is unknown to us. Wal-imanu bihi wajib, to believe in it is obligatory. Was-su'al anhu bid'ah, and to start asking about it is an innovation, to ask about how it is, right? So this is just one of hundreds of examples that could be given from the Salaf, in where they either, in a general sense, speak about the general principle of affirming the attributes, or in a specific sense, mentioning specific attributes, such as al-istiwa or an-nuzul Allah descending, or al-ityan, Allah arriving or coming on the Day of Judgment, and so on and so forth. So after this, the Shaykh goes on to mention some statements from Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah. And this is in his book, Dar Ta'arud al-Aql wal-Naql. And Ibn Taymiyyah says, he's speaking about this tafweed, right? He says, وَأَمَّا التَّفْوِيض, as for a tafweed, which is to claim to be ignorant of the meanings of the verses and hadiths of the attributes, right? As if we don't know what we are reading, and we don't know the meanings of what we are reading. He says, as for tafweed, فَمِنَ الْمَعْلُومِ أَنَّ اللَّهَ أَمَرَنَا بِتَدَبُّرِ الْقُرْآنِ. As for this claim of tafweed, it is known that Allah has commanded us to reflect upon the Quran. وَحَضَّنَا عَلَىٰ عَقْلِهِ وَفَهْمِهِ. And He has encouraged us to comprehend it and to understand it with our intellect, with our comprehension. فكيف يجوز مع ذلك أن يراد منا الإعراض عن فهمه ومعرفته وعقله. So how then is it permissible alongside this to say that what is desired or requested from us is to turn away from understanding it and from knowing it and from comprehending it? Like, why are you saying the exact opposite of what Allah is telling us to do? Because in the Quran, we have been told and encouraged to make tadabbur, to have fahm, to understand, to have fiqh, to comprehend, right? And then you are saying, no. These texts, there's nothing in these texts. There's nothing to reflect upon. There's no meaning in these texts that we know of. How can you be telling us the exact opposite of what Allah is telling us, right? And this is really what the principle of tafweed, where you claim you are completely ignorant of the meaning and it's not possible ever to know the meaning, right? This is what you are really saying. You're really saying Allah has told us to reflect, ponder, understand, comprehend His Quran, the greatest of which is the verses to do with His attributes and His names. But what we should really be doing is we should turn away from that and just assume our ignorance and not to reflect and not to comprehend and not to understand, right? So this principle of tafweed is literally you are telling us to do other than what Allah has told us clearly in the Quran. Then he continues in the passage and he says, فَعَلَى قَوْلِ هَؤُلَاء يكون الأنبياء والمرسلين لا يعلمون معاني ما أنزل الله عليهم من هذه النصوص ولا الملائكة ولا السابقون الأولون وحينئذ فيكون ما وصف الله به نفسه في القرآن أو كثير مما وصف الله به نفسه لا يعلم الأنبياء معناه بل يقولون كلاما لا يعقلون معناه. He continues and he says, upon the statement of these people, right? So if we accept for argument's sake what these people are saying, yes, these verses are unknown and we are ignorant, then what they are saying also, another thing that they are saying is that the prophets and the messengers, they do not actually know the meaning of what Allah revealed to them of these texts, right? So the prophets and the messengers do not know what Allah means and what Allah desires and what the meaning Allah intends when He says Ar-Rahmanu ala al-arshi istawa, that Allah ascended above the throne, or that Allah hears. Qad sami Allah, Allah has indeed heard the speech of the woman who disputes with you, right? That Allah hears, or Allah sees, or that Allah becomes pleased, or Allah becomes angry, right? We don't know the meaning. Meaning that the prophets and messengers did not know the meanings of what Allah revealed to them of these particular texts. وَلَا الْمَلَائِكَةِ, nor the angels, nor the very first generation, the righteous Salaf. And so therefore, what this means upon their saying is that what Allah described Himself with in the Quran, or much of what Allah has described Himself with, the prophets do not know its meaning. Rather, the prophets are simply saying speech whose meaning they don't even understand. Right? So in other words, it's as if you are saying that when the Prophet ﷺ, when he conveyed and recited the Quran to the Sahaba and came to these verses, Ar-Rahmanu ala al-Arsh istawa, Allah ascended above the throne, Bal yadahu mabsutatan, Bal, rather both His hands are outstretched, وَيَبْقَى وَجْهُ رَبِّكَ ذُو الْجَلَالِ وَالْإِكْرَامِ, the face of your Lord shall remain, which is possessed of majesty and honor. Right? That the Prophet did not know what he was reciting. He didn't know what he was reciting except just the words, the letters. Right? So they're ascribing ignorance to the prophets and the messengers, right? So this now is a second thing. First thing you're telling us to do the opposite of what Allah told us, to reflect, ponder, understand, comprehend. Secondly, you are saying that the prophets and messengers were conveying of these texts, the Quran in this case, and in the case of the Torah and the Injil would be the same, that Musa alayhi salam and Isa alayhi salam and Muhammad sallam, they did not know what they were reciting. They were ignorant and they were just conveying words with no meanings to their nations. It's the second thing that they are saying. And then the Shaykh goes on to say, Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he says, وَمَعْلُومٌ أَنَّ هَذَا قَدْحٌ فِي الْقُرْآنِ وَالْأَنْبِيَاءِ إِذَا كَانَ اللَّهُ أَنزَلَ الْقُرْآنِ وَأَخْبَرَ أَنَّهُ جَعَلَهُ هُدًى وَبَيَانًا لِلنَّاسِ وأمر الرسول أن يبلغ البلاغ المبين وأن يبين للناس ما نزل إليهم وأمر بتدبر القرآن وعقله. ومع هذا فأشرف ما فيه هو ما أخبر به الرب عن صفاته أو عن كونه خالقا لكل شيء وهو بكل شيء عليم، أو عن كونه أمر ونهى ووعد وتوعد، أو عما أخبر به عن اليوم الآخر لا يعلم أحد معناه فلا يعقل ولا يتدبر ولا يكون الرسول بين للناس ما نزل إليهم ولا بلغ البلاغ المبين. Right. So in this lengthy passage he says, it is known that this therefore is a revilement of the Quran. Right? So the statement of Tawheed, where you say, no one knows the meaning of these verses, we don't know the meanings of these verses, we resign the knowledge of it to Allah. Right? This means that you are telling us to not reflect upon the Quran, and you are saying to us that the prophets are ignorant of what they are conveying. Right? So therefore, Ibn Taymiyyah says that it is known that this is a revilement upon the Quran and the prophets. Because if Allah Azza wa Jal has revealed this Quran and informed us that He made it to be guidance and a clarification for mankind, and He ordered His messenger to convey this Quran with a very clear, open conveyance, and to explain to the people clearly what has been revealed to them, to explain to them what's in this Quran, what has been revealed to them. And Allah also ordered with reflecting upon the Quran and understanding the Quran, and at the same time, the greatest and most noblest of what is in the Quran is what He mentioned about Himself, about His attributes, that He is the creator of everything, that He has knowledge of everything, that He commands and prohibits, that He promises and makes a threat, or that, whatever He informed about the Day of Judgment, that you are saying that no one knows its meaning such that it can be understood and such that it can be reflected upon, and that the messenger did not, that he did not explain to the people what was revealed to them, and he did not therefore convey it with a very clear conveyance, right? This is what you're basically saying, all these things you are saying, all right? And the Shaykh says, if this is the case, if this is what you are saying now, right? Because remember, when someone opens this door, if you open this door, this argument here, you are now opening the door for many other people. So if what you are saying is that the prophets and messengers conveyed of the Quran that whose meaning they were ignorant of and didn't know, and at the same time, these verses are from the verses in the Quran about which Allah has asked us to reflect and to ponder and to understand in order to acquire knowledge about Him. If that's what you are saying, and this is your argument, and we accept this argument, وعلى هذا التقدير فيقول كل ملحد ومبتدئ الحق في نفس الأمر ما علمته برأيي وعقلي وليس في النصوص ما يناقض ذلك. Now it's possible for every deviant and innovator to now come along and to say, you know what? The truth in the issue is actually what I've come to know through my opinion and my intellect. And it cannot be what is in the texts. Right? Because my intellect and what is understood and its opinion clashes with what has come in the text. Why? Because the texts now are basically ambiguous. We don't know the meaning. It's ambiguous, right? So if you accept this statement that the verses of the attributes of Allah, which impart knowledge to us about Allah, as somehow nobody knows their meaning, they are from the affairs of the unseen, it's impossible for us to know them, we have to resign it to Allah, therefore these verses are from the ambiguous verses which contain hidden knowledge which only Allah knows. This means that a person can come along and he can say that since the verses of the Quran in these subjects, whether it is the names and attributes of Allah, or whether it is to do with the unseen affairs, that I don't have to believe what has come in these verses. I don't have to believe what has come in these verses, right? I don't need to believe in the verses which mention Allah's anger and mercy and pleasure and His face and Him ascending above the throne. And I don't need to believe in the Quran when it says, the mawazeen, right? The scales of balance, because, what exactly does that mean? And how is a man's deeds weighed anyway? So that cannot be, it must mean something else, whose reality we don't really know. So not only do you apply this to the attributes of Allah, you can now start applying it to other areas of creed as well, from the unseen, right? Such as we said, things on the Day of Judgment, like the bridge over hellfire, or the scales of balance, or what is actually in paradise and hellfire, right? Because you can claim, this we don't understand the meaning of these things. They could just be metaphorical and allegorical, or it could just be hidden symbology or something. You can now open that door and apply it to everything in the Quran. You can even apply it to the commands and prohibitions, because this is what some of the extreme Shia, what they did. This is the way of what's the Syrian leader called? Bashar al-Assad. What's the name of there's a certain name that they're called, sect of that. It's escaped my knowledge now. It's Alawi, the Alawis. And they say, well, actually, there's no such thing as prayer, as-salah. It just means something else. And it means to keep secrets. And There's no such thing as Hajj. Hajj, it means something else. Like they explain away all of the actual symbols of religion because they're applying the same principle that, these are from hidden meanings, right? So basically what you're doing is by the statement of tafweed, and not just tafweed, but other things as well, you are opening up the door for every deviant, heretic, and even opportunist from the non-Muslims to come and to enter into Islam and to claim to be, a prophet, and to claim to be, you actually have cults like these appearing now in there's one in America I saw the other day. Some guy claiming to be a prophet, a Mahdi, with his followers. He's on YouTube claiming to have the correct interpretation of the Quran, right? And so you're opening the door for everybody to come along and claim these types of things. And he can claim that since the Quran is ambiguous in meaning, therefore the knowledge which it brings is not definitive knowledge. It's not clear knowledge. The definitive knowledge or the clear knowledge is what I've come to by way of my reason and my intellect. Because at least by way of my reason and intellect, I've come to like an established meaning. Whereas in the Quran, according to the saying of those people, we just have ambiguity and there's really nothing there to go upon. Right? And no one can say, your opinion is contradicted by the Quran, because there's nothing in those verses of meaning to begin with for you to say that my saying contradicts the Quran. Do you understand? Right? So you're opening up all of these doors of tremendous evil, once you open this door. And, as they say, because these texts are ambiguous, they are difficult, they're ambiguous, and no one knows their meaning, and that whose meaning is not known cannot be used as evidence. وَمَا لَا يَعْلَمُ أَحَدٌ مَعْنَاهُ لَا يَجُوزُ أَن يُسْتَدَلَّ بِهِ فيبقى هذا الكلام سدا لباب الهدى والبيان من جهة الأنبياء. Right? So he says that this type of speech, if you now use this type of speech, it becomes an actual obstacle. This now becomes an obstacle to the door of guidance, the door of clarification that has come from the direction of the prophets. So in other words, this speech of the Mufawwidah, right? Those who say about the verses of the attributes, they have no meaning that can be known. There is no meaning that can be reflected upon, that can be understood. Allah knows best what it means. We resign the knowledge of that to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We are completely ignorant of it. Once you say that, once you make that remark, and you are making that remark about the greatest type of knowledge, which is knowledge of Allah, right? So think about it. It's the greatest type of report, because who is conveying this to us? It is Allah Himself. And that khabar from Allah, the report from Allah, is the greatest type of report that can ever be. Secondly, what's the content of that report? In this instance, it is knowledge of Allah, right? It is His attributes, His names. If you are going to say about the greatest type of report and the greatest type of knowledge that can ever be, that this is somehow, ambiguous, unknown, cannot be reflected upon, cannot be understood, then how can we not now then say the same thing about every other type of knowledge which has come in the Quran? Because now the whole door is open for everything, right? Well, what Allah mentioned about the Day of Judgment and the Barzakh, what happens after death, and the specific things, a drinking pool, and the scales of measuring the deeds of men, and the bridge over hellfire, sharper than a sword, thinner than a hair, and the things which are in paradise. they don't make sense to the reason and to the intellect. And so it must really just, have some other hidden symbology or meaning. And really, there is no hereafter. Hereafter, paradise, hellfire is on this earth. Right? Hellfire and paradise are just descriptions or states in this earth. And there is no such thing as jinn, because jinn are it's just like personalities in people. Do you see where this can go? Right? You can go, and then you can say, well, even with the commands and the prohibitions, right? The prayer, purification. Purification doesn't mean to do the wudu, the ablution with water. It just means to keep your thoughts clean, to expunge the bad thoughts from your mind, right? And prayer doesn't mean prayer. So basically, this is to undermine the entire religion from its foundations. Once you open this door. And that's why Ibn Taymiyyah said, rahimahullah, فَيَبْقَى هَذَا الْكَلَامِ سَدًّا لِبَابِ الْهُدَى وَالْبَيَانِ مِنْ جِهَةِ الْأَنْبِيَاءِ. Right? So what does this speech do? The first thing this speech does is it closes shut the door between the prophets and messengers and what they conveyed of guidance and clarification. A door is placed between that and between it reaching the people. Right? That's the first thing this type of speech, what it does. Right? It's a door preventing guidance and clarification which came from the prophets. And secondly, وَفَتْحًا لِبَابِ مَنْ يُعَارِضُهُمْ وَيَقُولْ إِنَّ الْهُدَى وَالْبَيَانِ فِي طَرِيقِنَا لَا فِي طَرِيقِ الْأَنْبِيَاءِ. Secondly, it opens up the door for those who oppose the prophets and messengers, for them to say that guidance and clarification is actually in our path. It lies in the path that we are upon, not in the path that the prophets and messengers came with. And that's why you see among the philosophers, the mutafalsifa, are those who basically say, well, the prophets and messengers really only came for the common people, the ignorant common people who are unable to understand the higher truths. Right? So the prophets and messengers were just clever men, full of imagination, and they just wanted good for the society, so they made up stories to scare them and to encourage them about paradise, hellfire, and what happens in the grave. And these are just made up stories. They're not real, but they did it with a good intention. They did it in order to reform their people and to bring about morals and manners. And so this is good, this is fine. This is okay for the common people, because the common people are unable to understand the higher truths, because they're simple and this is what these people say. Whereas the true knowledge of the realities of the world and of what's maybe hidden from us, then that really comes from us, the philosophers, because we are doing the same thing that they did. They're just clever men with powerful imaginations, with good intentions. And, anyone can train himself to become a prophet. He can do exercises and sharpen his mind and expand his imagination and whatever else. And, you can reach the status of being a prophet. And that's what these people did and what they said. These people actually appeared. And so what we're doing is, Ibn Taymiyyah is not speaking about something theoretical that can happen. He's speaking about what already happened before him, which is why he's actually saying what he's saying, right? Because these people actually appeared from the people of Sufism and Tasawwuf, and they mixed it with philosophy and things like that. These people actually appeared, and then because they say, as they claim, guidance and clarification is in our path, not in the path of the prophets. لأننا نحن نعلم ما نقول ونبينه بالأدلة العقلية والأنبياء لم يعلموا ما يقولون فضلا عن أن يبينوا مرادهم. Look what they are saying. They are saying because we know what we are saying, right? So when we give you rational evidences, right, we are giving you them because we are clearly comprehending and knowing what we are saying. But the prophets, were only conveying things whose meaning they did not know, right? Right? Because obviously those people are saying that the verses of the attributes, no one knows their meanings. So the prophets are conveying things whose meanings they do not know. Whereas we, what they say, we are presenting to you rational evidences which we are clearly comprehending and knowing what we are saying. Right? So this is their argument then. These people, this is their argument, that the prophets conveyed something that they don't know, let alone being able to explain what they are conveying. Right? So if they didn't know what they are conveying, how on earth are they going to explain what they are conveying? Right? فتبين أن قول أهل التفويض الذين يزعمون أنهم متبعون للسنة والسلف من شر أقوال أهل البدع والإلحاد. He says, so it becomes clear therefore from all of this that the statement of the people of Tafweed, right? The statement of these people, those who say we don't know the meanings of the verses mentioning Allah's attributes. No one can know their meanings. Their meanings are unknown. They are from the unseen and the unknowable. So therefore we have to assume ignorance and relegate the knowledge of that to Allah, right? This statement here, those who claim that they are following the Sunnah and following the Salaf, this is from the most evil of the statements of the people of innovation and deviation. This statement here is the most evil. It's even worse than ta'wil. Ta'wil is to make a figurative interpretation, right? To say, Allah's face doesn't mean His face, it just means the majesty. Allah's mercy doesn't mean His mercy, it means His intent to reward. Allah's hand means His power. Allah descending means descent of His mercy. And so on and so forth, right? Allah hearing and seeing doesn't mean hearing and seeing, it just means His knowledge. Right? This here is not as evil as saying, well, we don't know what it means Allah made istiwa. Nobody knows what that means. Only Allah knows what that means, right? And so on and so forth for all of the other verses. Because here now you are ascribing ignorance to what the prophets and messengers conveyed. And then this allows that door to be opened for all of these other people. Even though both of these two paths, ta'wil and tafweed, are evil, but the statement of tafweed is more evil because of the implications of all of that. Right, so I think we can stop at that point for today's lesson. But what we're going to discuss in the next lesson is ta'wil. And ta'wil, as you know, is the allegorical or the figurative explanation. As you know, if you deny the attributes of Allah, then there are two ways you can use, there are two stances that you can take. The first one is to give novel interpretations, like we said. You can explain away the attributes by giving other explanations, far-fetched explanations, which do not exist in the language and which are not permitted in the grammar of those texts. The grammar of those texts does not allow those interpretations to be made. When you say, for example, hand means power in those particular verses, right? Or face means, something else or whatever. That's one approach you can take. And what these people realized is, the people of ta'wil, they felt uncomfortable in their hearts, because in their hearts they knew that they were kind of following conjecture and trying to guess what Allah could have meant, right? So they're saying, Allah doesn't mean face or hand or mercy or anger or pleasure in these verses. He doesn't mean that. But the meaning could be this. But they have no certainty or knowledge that indeed is what Allah actually intends. Because you've got no way of knowing that. The only way you can know that is if Allah gives you revelation to say, yes, that is the meaning. But obviously you don't have that. So that means deep inside your soul, you really know that you are really following a conjecture and you are guessing. Right? So, and then also when you fall into contradictions as well, because contradictions appear as well when you try to misinterpret these texts. So the people of Ta'wil, or some people saw, hang on, this doesn't look like really a good kind of approach here, because there's inconsistencies and we don't really know whether what we are saying, is it really what Allah intends? And it's kind of like speaking about Allah without knowledge. So therefore, some of these people said, well, actually the best policy is just simply to say, Allah knows best what these verses mean. Nobody knows what they mean. It's impossible to know what they mean. Only Allah knows what they mean. Therefore, we have to relegate the knowledge. We have to resign the knowledge of that to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so therefore, the safest and the best position is to simply the statement of tafweed, right? That we resign the knowledge of this to Allah. We don't know the meanings of these texts. But once you say that, you now open the door to all of this other evil, because anyone can now come along and say, well, actually, the Quran did not give us guidance in this issue of Allah's names and attributes, because the verses are all ambiguous. Nobody knows what they mean. And therefore, my reason, my opinion, which I've arrived at by way of clear reason and proof, this is more definitive in knowledge and guidance and clarification than the verses of the Quran, right? And my knowledge and guidance is more clear than what the prophets brought, because they just conveyed things they did not know and were unable to explain, therefore. Whereas here I have now brought, this is what a person can say, right? This is what the madhab of tafweed allows a person to come and start saying these things, and this actually happened in history, as we said. So it's important for us to understand that this issue of tafweed, all of these discussions, see this principle here, what we are discussing here, it's our knowledge of what Allah revealed, and connected to it is the issue of the Quran. In the Quran, there's that which is muhkam, and there's that which is mutashabih. There's that which is clear and definitive in its meaning, and there's that which is ambiguous in its meaning. Not that its meaning is unknown, but just that to some people who don't have knowledge and grounding, the verses of the Quran may be ambiguous to him. Right? That's what it actually means. Not that the meaning is completely ambiguous, meaning that we can never know what it is. No, that's not what's actually meant. What's meant by tashabuh is that some people know the meaning, other people, to them, it hasn't become clear to them. Right? That's what it actually means. And therefore, this issue of ta'wil and tafweed, as these people try to claim, that these are approaches towards the ambiguous verses of the Quran as they claim, that's based upon a false understanding of what ambiguous means, right? Because they're thinking ambiguous means no one knows the meaning. That's not what it actually means, right? Which is why in this fifth principle, there's more to come yet, but you get the general sense of what we are discussing, right? We are discussing the Quran because our knowledge is coming from the Quran. What's the nature of our knowledge? We know one aspect, the ma'na. We don't know the other aspect, which is kayfiyah. Connected to this is the issue of ta'wil and tafweed. Right? We discussed tafweed today. It's an evil statement. In the next lesson, we're going to discuss ta'wil, which is where you give the metaphorical interpretation. And then we're going to come back to the issue of tashabuh and ihkam, right? Precision in the Quran and ambiguity in the Quran. What exactly does that mean? Right? So through that discussion, this shubha or this misconception should be very, very clear to us thereafter. Once we've clarified all these different things, we should be able to immediately see through this false argument and this false misconception and the misuse of that verse in Surah Ali Imran, which is used by the people of innovation. Right? All these affairs, inshallah, should be clear through the discussion of this point number 5 or principle number 5. So with that, we'll conclude our lesson there for today. Inshallah, we'll continue next week at the same time, inshallah ta'ala. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.